Some perspective on this from former MI5 agent Annie Machon joining us live from Berlin. So fairly unusual to get some reports like this from Canada, and when it does happen, it's always something shocking. Do you think there is an impetus behind this recent surge in violence there?
I think it's interesting, but it's too early to speculate about where it's coming from. I'm sure that the political classes in Canada will make political hay out of this by saying that it must be Islamic extremism, domestic radicalization, that sort of thing. But I think that horrific as this crime is, and my sympathies go out to the family, horrific as this crime is, we need to take a step back, and there needs to be a proper crime scene investigation. We need to look at the forensics, we need to identify the perpetrators, we need to look at who they're linked with and where they're coming from and what their motivation might have been, rather than jumping to conclusions for political ends.
Now, from the reports that we have, there were about 30 shots fired inside the Parliament building itself. Fortunately, none of the Parliament members, the Prime Minister, no public officials were killed. Do you think their aim was to murder, or they had perhaps just they wanted to make a statement? What do you think of the motivation, possibly?
Well, if they're aiming at a government building, then obviously they do have some sort of political motivation behind them. But I think it's too early at this stage to try and speculate about what that would be. Let's not forget, for example, the attack and the bombing in Oklahoma in America in 1995. And all the initial media reports were that Al-Qaeda or Islamic extremists had carried this out. And in fact, it turned out that a domestic extremist, Timothy McVeigh, had carried out the attack. And similarly as well with the downing of MH17, the Malaysian flight over Ukraine. Immediately, everyone jumped to the assumption that it must be Russian separatists armed by Russia who carried out the attack. And of course, the only way to establish what really happens is for a thorough forensic investigation and an evidential case-building study after the attack, when people can work out what happened, hopefully gather evidence and put people on trial in front of a jury of their peers. That would be the sane, logical and actually mature response within a mature democracy. So I hope that the Canadians will do that, rather than using this as yet another pretext for stripping away the civil liberties and increasing surveillance and policing of the Canadian people.
So based on your experience with British intelligence, what do you think Canadian intelligence officials, what steps are they going through right now?
Well, it'll be a linkage between the police and also the intelligence agencies. So they will be trying to secure the crime scenes, trying to arrest any further perpetrators that might be out there, and gathering the forensic information. But once they identify the perpetrators, they need to work out who they are, what their potential affiliations might be, who their networks potentially might be, and what their motivation is. So it's very much an evidential gathering process, rather than hopefully not a hysterical over-response politically, which suddenly says, oh, we've got to spy on everybody and this is justification for dragnet surveillance. We saw something similar last year in the UK with the gruesome murder and beheading of drummer Lee Rigby. And that was definitely a political statement. But the British government at that point did say, we are not going to have a knee-jerk reaction. We are not going to push for more snooping and surveillance powers until we really know what's going on here. And all credit to them for that.
We did, though, have that incident, that horrific incident in the UK, and then there was before there were the 7/7 attacks. The genie of terror appears to be out of the bottle in the UK. Do you think the same thing could be the case in Canada now?
It might possibly be evolving. As I said, it's too early to know. The genie of terrorism has been out of the bottle in the UK for decades, though. People tend to forget, since 9/11, that the UK has been suffering terrorism for decades because of the civil war in Northern Ireland. The provisional IRA in the 1970s, 80s and 90s could put bombs down at will on UK streets for political advancement, and they did. And they had many, many big PR hits, and they caused many thousands of deaths. And yet, even through those 3 decades of terrorism that we experienced in the UK on a fairly regular basis, we did not throw away our civil liberties and our basic freedoms in the way that since 9/11 we have done across the world. And I would counsel all governments to try and avoid that and to gather the evidence and take measured steps before we throw away our hard-won freedoms across the Western world.
All right, former MI5 agent Annie Machon, thank you for your time.